We are here because our students need this. The world needs us. And the things we do, no matter how technical or strategic they may seem, are always oriented towards that level of mission fulfillment and impact. And so as we start today, I want us to just kind of all continue to think about that, particularly discussions like this. I always love to sort of challenge everyone to sort of think of a student, right? And think of someone or an employer or someone in our community who really benefits from the work that we do. How does this make their lives better? But as we start, let me just, again, briefly welcome you. This is the Sandbox. Just a quick logistic. If you would like to use restrooms, just out here to the right. We also have lunch, and we have a new cold brew coffee thing, which I think I drink most of it. But anyway, and this thing, what is that?
So we have some folks on a live stream. So while everyone in this room can probably hear each other, the folks on the live stream can't hear you unless you use a microphone. So we're going to pass this around. If anybody has any questions in the audience, just raise your hand.
And then I think finally, too, just in terms of our work and the work that we do at Sandbox and through the Innovation Center, anything you need, we exist to support the university. If there's anything that sort of arises from today or questions or even anything you might like clarification on or a connection, please reach out to us. Always funnel those things in our direction, and we are always happy to help. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Greenfield, Managing Partner at Rethink Education and SNHU Board Member. Matt's going to be moderating the discussion and sort of walking us through what the schedule is going to be. So thanks, Matt.
Thank you for hosting this and giving me this opportunity, which I will do my best to deserve. So we're going to have a panel discussion, but really I hope we're going to have, this is a small enough room so that we can all get in on the action. And I think it's boring to have a panel where people deliver serial monologues. So I hope that even the three of you will feel free to ask questions or make comments as you're introducing your own relationship to AI. So we'll have this panel discussion, and then we'll hear from three really interesting entrepreneurs. And I will make just a few very brief remarks. I was just talking to a couple of you about Workday, and how many of you use Workday in your day-to-day jobs? How many of you use the predecessor systems? Okay, not so many. What would you say the difference is in using a SaaS system? Speed. Okay, a little less annoyance. So a lot of companies did not make the transition from premises-based software to SaaS. They thought they could just take their existing systems and rewrite them as SaaS products, and it ended up not working. And I think there's an open question about whether we're about to see the same thing with AI, that it's going to cause an upheaval and a wholesale replacement of everything across the software industry. There's also a question about what it's going to do to universities. Do you have to rebuild your university in order to make effective use of AI over time? I was in the offices of a major media company's board, and I was just leaving, and 4 guys were headed in, and I asked them what they did, and they said, we have a big data analytics startup. And I, with my wise mouth, said, I'd love to learn more about what you do specifically, because I think that in about 18 months, you won't identify yourselves as a big data analytics company. You'll just say we're a company, right? That any company that isn't doing big data analytics is out of business. They had the last laugh because they walked in and sold their company for $500 million. Literally that meeting. As you think about all of the software that you use today, all of those companies are going to be trying to graft AI onto what they do, and the question is whether they'll make it. But now that's enough pontificating for me. Let's cue up the video. And this is a video of AI in operation. It's a particular strategy called adaptive evolutionary algorithms, where you have a program that mutates. And the mutations are each evaluated for fitness relative to a goal, and the weaker ones are eliminated. Sometimes you take some of the really weak ones and let them reproduce anyway, just to keep some variety in it. And these algorithms, in this case, what you're going to see is something that reproduces the evolution of life, or part of it. But sometimes these AIs come up with extraordinarily unexpected solutions. The creativity of it, it's a little bit uncanny. I want us to keep in mind as we talk about AI that it's a sorcerer's apprentice-like tool that if you don't use it extremely carefully, will do things that you didn't intend it to do. So let's see the video. Adopting to different speeds. This is walking on the gravity of another, with the gravity of another planet. That's Jupiter. You weigh a lot more on Jupiter. Thanks. Okay, so hopefully we're now all in a playful and alert frame of mind. So I'd like each of the three of you to just say a little bit about what you do and what you're doing with AI, and feel free to interject questions or comments. And you should also all free to jump in when you have a serious question.
I don't have a mic, so why don't you go first? I'll go grab it. Oh, thank you.
Sorry.
So my name is Rob Curtin. I'm with Microsoft, and thank you for having me. And if you guys don't know, this is Matt Greenfield. He's actually pretty important when it comes to things getting done in this industry. So really honored to be here. But from a Microsoft standpoint, the flat answer is we've repositioned the entire company around AI. We can talk about cloud. We can talk about public statements. We can point to our mission statement around empower every individual and organization in the world, and we take every very seriously. But AI is at the heart of everything we do, from fundamental research to how you see it in office, to how you log in to your computer from a security standpoint. You see your face today. And something we take very seriously, which is the role of AI to extend access. When we think about people who behave, act, and have physical abilities different than the norm, in too many ways, they have been shut out from both access to technology and even access to life's great achievements, right? So one of the most exciting elements we see of AI is the ability for language, physical access, vision, transcription, is now actually building markets for companies because they're able to increase addressable market by 15, 20%, because they can now access people who otherwise wouldn't. So it's not just a good thing to do for people, it's actually a great thing to do for business. And so AI is kind of at the heart of what we're doing everywhere.
So I'm Elizabeth Hubbard. I'm from the Information Security Department, and a lot of what we do with AI is we're constantly watching the environment. So we're relying on mostly our third-party vendors for the AI capabilities to be, and as an instance, we used to manually take report after report, scrub them down to see where people were logging in, could they possibly be logging in from these two different geographical locations at the same time, and then escalating tickets to make sure that systems weren't compromised. Microsoft behind the scenes all of a sudden starts adding in this AI that's saving us days and days worth of work and scrubbing to quickly identify if somebody might have given up their credentials or used their credentials in different places that they weren't. So that's a lot of where we see AI in the analyzing network traffic, analyzing user behaviors, and it's really helping out. We also see it a lot within the communities. A lot of the different teaching environments are trying to develop new and better ways to do things, automate different processes that they used to take long times to accomplish. And so they come to us and we help them either develop it or analyze vendors and products to make sure that if they're reaching out to a third party or doing a hybrid solution, that we're evaluating the right criteria to make sure the technical controls are in place.
Great.
So my name is Priya Chatterjee. I've recently joined the Innovation Center here at SNHU. So prior to this, for a year, I was the head of the data and analytics team, and we have a data science team here, sort of represented. Prior to that, for 17 years, I was at American Express in sort of different capacities. My main sort of interest in AI right now is, given the mission that we have here at SNHU to make education be accessible for a lot more people than we are able to reach right now, to what extent can we use AI? Again, AI to me is a very, as of now, it's a very narrow way to define it. I would kind of call it advanced analytics, where AI is a bit of a subset. How do we leverage advanced analytics tools to be able to serve our mission, if you will? So with the data science team, we had, in my prior role, we had explored sort of different aspects of how do we delve into the student experience, and to what extent can we lower the cost, if you will, at every single stage of the student's life cycle. So if you think about the student's journey right now, there's the prospecting piece where we are trying to bring them in to join SNHU. That cost can be lowered by leveraging AI and other types of technologies. Similarly, once they join us, at every single stage, and the technologies exist right now, there are lots of companies that have, and I think Georgia State University has something called AdmitHub. So they've been leveraging this firm called AdmitHub, and they have something called Pounce, so the AI talks to the student, texts back and forth, and the response has been very good, and the melt rate has dropped by 20%. So this is just one example. So I definitely see a future where lots of institutions, along with us, will be trying to lower the cost, and they have their own sort of reasons for doing that. Ours is I'd like to believe, a very noble mission. The other interest I have is also as a consumer, and I think, and I speak for most of us, we are part of the 1% or 0.1%. The concern that I have, and most of you who have kept track of all of the discussions that are going on, is there is a concern that AI will lead to a huge amount of job loss. And so there are lots of dystopian concerns around that. And there also SNHU can help, because there is discussions around how do we help the folks who might lose their jobs? What type of educational solutions can we put forth that will help them? So there are sort of lots of interests that motivate me.
Great, thank you. So in your current uses of AI, what do you see as the risks or dangers or problems? Maybe we should get to you last, because I know you have a lot to say.
Yeah, I can speak to, so I don't see a lot of negatives from the standpoint of, if you think of it as, so given my background as a welfare economist, anytime when we talk about something being good or bad, you have to kind of add a punctuation mark and say for who. So it depends on your vantage point. So if you're thinking of, well, in the SNHU context, for instance, if you're thinking of the student, any AI technology that either makes it cheaper or better is good for them. If you think of a future where, so we currently have advisors. So if you think of a future where AI that gets deployed, that leads to fewer advisors being needed, for instance, the student benefits if the quality is constant. The advisors who might not be here might not benefit from it in that sense. But to answer your question, the challenge that I see is more in terms of deployment. And this is true here and elsewhere with old technologies and also new technologies. And that is, how do you change how do you change the engine of the plane while the plane is flying? And how do you make the transition? That is always going to be a bit of a battle. So I feel for us to do it right, whether it's SNHU or anybody else who's trying to do it, you definitely need a fairly broad education around what is AI and what is it not. Secondly, I've discovered that there is a bit of a mindset that you bring the AI in and you drop it and everything else is done. And that's rarely true, because the world that we are getting into, there is going to be a winner-take-all dynamic. So there are going to be few folks who are going to do it right, who are going to do it well, and they're going to corner the market. And those are the folks who will do it right. When I say right, they will basically not just buy the AI, but they'll buy the AI, understand the AI, deploy it well. A very good example could be personas, for instance, understanding the students that we have. If you figure, it's not enough for us to know who the students are, type A, type B, type C. You have to know what are the strategies you will deploy against them. So if type A student come, here's what I have to do, and you have to stay with it over time.
We see some of the same challenges in information security is because everybody sees that bright new AI. It can do all these wonderful things, and marketing out there really does a good job for these third-party vendors saying, this is great. But you got to really sit back and figure out a strategy and what the problem is and what it's going to solve, and see what the AI can actually do and how it can help benefit you before you just run out and want to buy it. There's a lot of considerations. You want to look at that strategic map. You want to look at, the ownership, the roles and responsibilities. Implementing it isn't just about developing it or rolling it out and buying it. It takes a lot to be able to keep that up to date, make sure the vulnerabilities in it are constantly monitored. And that's why oftentimes using third parties or hybrid solutions are key elements, because it takes sometimes 24/7 monitoring and a lot of different inputs in order to make it secure.
Yeah, I know that there's one very colorful story that you can tell about an experience that Microsoft had putting a conversational bot out on the web. And I'm sure you have a lot of other things to say about the dangers.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing Tay up. Who here has ever heard of Tay? Tay was a virtual 14-year-old girl that we released to the Twitter sphere about 2 years ago. And it was an awesome story because she had the personality of a 14-year-old girl. She was incredibly intelligent. She could handle millions of conversations at the same time, and she learned. She learned, like we do, to mimic her peers, things that were reinforced as good. She picked up on as, oh, if this is a cool word and cool people say it, I too will say it. Never underestimate humans. Ever underestimate humans versus machines. Within 24 hours, who knows what happened? I know you know. Who knows what happened in 24 hours? She was an absolute sex fiend, racist Trump. Like, she was horrible within 24 hours. And
Sex fiend? I don't think I heard about that part.
she said horrible things. Like, they reinforced racy as well as racist comments. And what had happened was the same technology as what's known as a denial of service attack. And humans understanding, and college campuses around the world deal with this, that you actually let the enemy inside your firewall every day. Incredibly fun. Like, no one really got hurt. Their feelings got hurt. But people bombarded Tay with multiple actors on the Twitter sphere as their own bots to condition her. And so it's actually a fundamentally human empathy story, because you start to think about whether they're kidnapped children in Africa who become fighters, right? That if your environment reinforces behavior A, B, or C, your context becomes entirely different. And frankly, Tay was incredibly human in this moment and learned through being bombarded with the wrong messages that this is appropriate behavior. And frankly, it does give us some insight into horrific moments in human history that we put into the context of that's okay. And so that happened to us. And
You don't think she was easier to manipulate than a human being. You just think,
I just think the technology. So do I know? Think is the right word. What do I think? I don't know anything. I think she was manipulated a lot like a human. I think that's my think, right? The fact that it happened in 24 hours is that we were able to simulate the human model of building context through volume that a normal human could never have. So what would have taken us a decade plus in human conditioning, or at least moments of intense stress, which is fundamentally what boot camp is based on, right? Like, we're going to break you down into a moment of intense stress and rebuild you from there. She was subjected to that same type of volume. And I think there's this sensational thing about AI that's real, because that's a real story, relatively harmless, and no one was really hurt. We got a little bit of a black eye from a reputation standpoint. But I'll ask, I think, a fun question about the fear. How many people have been killed by a shark attack off Cape Cod this year?
one,
Killed. One. How many seriously injured?
2.
One officially, but 2, there was a bite, right? 1 each. So think about all of the potential accidents on Cape Cod this year. Which one's greater? Car accident injuries, right? Car accident deaths, right? Like, we can go through any number of these things. And the fear of a shark attack, though, is at the core of our human. Like, oh, that's horrible, right? And we think about AI being exploited, right? The vulnerability of AI gets us right back to the driverless car, right? How many driverless car deaths have there been in Arizona this year?
1.
One, right? How many car deaths in Arizona this year, right? You don't even know. How many bet it's a lot more than 1, right? But you don't even know. And so we have this issue where there is a shark-like fear around how AI can be exploited. And it's real because the volume is Tay-like. We could turn everyone into this in a day. And so there are some serious concerns around transparency, privacy, and ultimately what I'll call responsible use. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I'll build one more example, because you talked about melt and everything else. We suffer from a really bad, this classic garbage in, garbage out problem, right? Today, machine learning algorithms, and machine learning looks at data, have determined that African American males from the south side of Atlanta shouldn't be admitted to college. Do you agree with that? Statistically speaking, right? If you live in the south side of Atlanta and you went to any one of these high schools, we're not going to let you in, particularly if you're African American, because the model says so. That's horrible, right? So what we've begun to do, and what I think
Priya, talk about that,
yeah,
that particular model, was it looking at academic outcomes, or was it looking at
it was just
human
it was just bad data. It was bad data statistically that was very incomplete. It said the only data it had was biodemographics, high school test score, and outcomes.
Okay.
That's it. So the only correlation it could make was things like address, skin color, and correlation to outcomes. When you can determine mindset, and you say, well, if you've exhibited behaviors of persistence, if you've exhibited grit, if you've shown you can do X, Y, or Z, those statistics flip.
I think there are some far worse examples of machine learning training processes using data sets created by humans, ending up with terrible biases. You run a set of photographs of various human activities through the system, and you end up having a man in the kitchen identified as a chef, and a woman in the kitchen identified as a homemaker. The biases are encoded in our data sets. So this is a really challenging thing for machine learning used for predictive purposes, is that it encodes human biases, subtle ones, in the selection of the data set. So for analytics, you mentioned the use case where you look at incoming students and recommend particular pathways to them. And we at Rethink are investors in Civitas, which is a predictive analytics company that is working on a feature called degree maps that will tell you what grade you're likely to get in a particular course, which will in turn tell you whether you can succeed as, for example, a pre-med, or whether you can succeed in nursing or the accounting major. And that is a useful thing on the one hand, because you don't want to take a course that you're going to fail. But on the other hand, if you have a strong enough desire to do that particular thing, maybe the right question is, what do we have to do to get you over the hump in that gateway course, and not, are you going to succeed in it?
No, great point. So this is a very good example of where human beings are needed. So one of the things, again, back to the whole discussion around AI or machines becoming super smart, super fast at doing math, doesn't solve the problem. It just gets you part of the way there. And to your point, you're absolutely right. A lot of machine learning algorithms right now are based on, or are as good as the data that is fed it. Even if you go into deep learning, sort of a lot of the data is kind of labeled. But the human being has to come in and make a decision around all that the model is saying is, if you did not, if you behaved as others did historically, here is what might happen to you. It doesn't say anything about what if you changed your behavior. So the machine might say, Priya can choose to do basketball, but the probability, given history, given all the Indians who've played basketball over the past 15, 20 years, the probability of success is X. Doesn't mean that it has to be X. I can change that. Okay, there's a low probability that I'm going to sort of catch up to Michael Jordan. I'm dating myself, but you get the point.
Larry Bird.
Huh? Larry Bird. Will Chamberlain. So, but the point is that I could do A, B, and C for me to increase the probability of success. Yes. And that's a good example of something where we have to be smart about what we do with the output, which is also true now with anything that we do. Our computer or anything else that we use can give you answers to certain things.
Yeah.
What you do with it. The tricky thing, again, this is where I'll bring up my sort of welfare economics background, and this is very true with driverless cars. Even if, and the technology, thanks to deep learning, is there now, wherein, and I think, Rob, that was a good example of, it is there wherein it's going to be better than human-driven cars, except judgment questions. So how do you tell the car that you have two options? If you move left, you're going to hit one person. If you swerve right, you're going to hit 5.
Trolley problem.
The trolley problem. Who decides to tell the car in terms of the coding that go left or go right? What if I say that the left is a child, and if you swerve right, it's 4 adults or 5 adults?
What if it's 2
map-
adults?
sorry?
What if it's 2 adults and they're very sick?
What if it's 2 adults? So that's right. So you can. So this is where there's going to be a lot of discussion, a lot of debate around the ethics of it, around the legality of it, and this is where it's going to get very interesting.
And the problem with machine learning, which is one subset of AI today, is you don't know how it arrived at its conclusions. Yes. It's a black box, right? You don't know. And we obviously need, at some point, to arrive at some kind of transparent auditing that shows us what the assumptions and biases and decisions along the way are, and that lets us fine-tune things. So here's a machine learning model, but let us tweak it so that it doesn't say that people from this neighborhood or with this skin color are more likely to commit recidivist acts, and therefore we should not give them parole. How do we eliminate that bias and still use machine learning to look at other traits? How do we use it in a fair way? You were talking before about the difficulty of deploying it, and the difficulty of deploying it in a fair way is even higher. But then beyond that, and this is, I think, the question I'm really interested in hearing from all of you about, How does the institution need to change in order to use these powerful tools in the right way? How does a university need to change?
I think understanding the roles and responsibilities that everybody plays into this will be a big help. It's not just implemented, testing's done, you know, was biases put into the coding initially, but it is constantly learning. It's constantly reevaluating and seeing, you know, did it learn something? Is there a new exploit out there? Is there a new vulnerability out there that it could be impacted? So it's just understanding that the responsibility goes much farther than just at the implementation stage. This is a continuous process.
I have an example of something we're doing right now. I have a visual of it if that's okay.
Sure.
So if you wouldn't mind putting my slides up, I think it's like the 4th slide or so. I'll just get through these. It's not this one.
Good slide.
I think I'm hitting forward. Here we go. Not that one. I'll come back to that. Right here. This is something that's in Office 365 today, and it builds on what Priya talked about, which is, you know, mining behavior as a profile of success rather than attribute, right? So where I'm from isn't going to change. My DNA isn't going to change. And as humans, we really hate the concept of Gattaca, Minority Report. We love the little engine that could story, right? Despite all odds. So behavior is a much better indicator of whether I'm tracking appropriately or not demographic profiles. So one of the things that we're able to actually glean because of the cloud, you pointed out Workday, when Office lived on servers here, we could never mine this. When Office lives in the cloud, we actually know literally how often you crack the books, how many clicks does it take to get to the center of an Excel spreadsheet, right? For those that know Tootsie Pop reference, you can get it. But what this is telling me, right, is there's a couple of things. This is always on. The metadata that I kick off is always on, and the learnings come back. And as my mom told me, you're always defined by your friends, right? So you can see who I work closely with, right? There's me, who I'm beginning to lose touch with, who I work with regularly. And then there's even little hints. Now, I'm not sharing all of the insights here. One of them was you should be smarter at your job. You kind of stink. But one was like, you know, last week you sent several invites to people at the last minute. Like, you know, now I can tweak it, right? And say like, you know, that's because I'm dynamic, right? And the answer was no, it's because you have ADD. And the second, and this is, I actually found really interesting. I think I'm hitting the wrong one here. We're going the wrong way. Here. And this one I found, this is just last week. So I took a screenshot of this today. Did you know most of your meetings were scheduled by others? Like personally, I found that really insightful, right? Because it basically says I'm a receiver and not a driver, which is just drives against my personal
Or maybe you have an assistant.
self-identity. In this case, I don't, but thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance to save myself. So there's all sorts of stuff, but there's a couple of insights that are coming up there. Now, I show this because it's AI, right? It's AI learning from the norm, applying it to me, but it's a massive policy issue. The name of this, and we is called My Analytics, right? The data that's here is incredible, particularly for a university, to be able to take a look at this data, build profiles of behavior, who you work with, how often you work with them, when do you open, save, edit, how many edits does it take to get an A versus how many edits does it take to get a C, right? These are things we can actually pull out right now. But at Microsoft, we will not let a manager see any of this data. We will not aggregate it into any reports that management or other, and this is a self-discovery question because we don't know what evil we might unleash. We don't know how people will then begin to game the system, which I can assure you in 1992, I graduated from college, went to work at Microsoft, and we dialed in with a modem, right? So you dialed in. I intentionally would send emails at 5 o'clock that I knew wouldn't go out because I wasn't dialed in, come home from going out on Friday and connect, right? And I was what a 23-year-old on Friday night typically is at midnight, right? And my manager would mention a couple of months later, that Curtin sent an email at midnight on Fridays. I'm laughing like, job well done, right? So we don't want to create a model where people are actually generating activity to make the bar go up, even though the activity doesn't have better outcomes. We don't want to generate a model where you're being measured by X, Y, and Z. But if we can derive behavioral heuristics that we give to an individual and/or those they empower and trust, there's some really powerful insight that you would never have. And so how we manage these policies and how we think through these experiences and how we take the data that was previously never available and use it for good. And I loved your comment about transparency, because we're 2 years into this, and the only people we share this with is yourself. We and we're supposed to be a smart company, right? Ish. Haven't figured out a way to actually turn this into policy. It's just guidance.
You could offer it at the aggregate level if someone has enough direct reports, or across the work group or the company.
Actually, just to kind of add to it, so this is a tool that you as a user of Office 365 would see. The data that's behind it, people on the live stream. Yeah, the data behind this tool is the Microsoft Graft, and it is there for your institution to use and mine. And your students are on 365 already, right? So this is email, calendar, all Office applications, everything they get to through 365. The data is there.
Yeah.
So, with the caution Rob's put forward, you can access this data. This is just our tool for you to look at what it looks like in the data, what you look like, sorry.
So I'd love to hear the two of you respond. And maybe think about the different ways that this could go tragically wrong.
Well, I'm really glad you shared this, because this is what security is concerned about. Our students fear, our faculty, our university fears that the revealing of data that you don't want to, or the use of data in ways that you don't want to. So we're constantly evaluating to see what can you get at, who has access to it, ensuring that it's used legally, ethically, for the right purposes.
And they're not always the same thing.
And any of this data could be used or have biases as you're starting to write it into code and write it into different AI solutions for analytics. So we're constantly looking at that when we're evaluating the product. So it's great to see that behind the scenes, and we already kind of know this, that Microsoft is also looking at the same thing.
So I have a slightly different take. I think I don't disagree that any AI that we develop can be used in not so good of a manner. Back to when cars arrived, I'm pretty sure there was some discussion around, I know Jim goes nuts on Fridays. What if he takes a car and he mows people down? So I don't think that's, I'm not disagreeing that we have to have checks and balances. And even now, even prior to getting into the AI age, we had challenges around whether it's a credit card company, and I have experience with American Express. We always had discussions around what you know of the customer, to what extent can you use it, and do we have concerns around is it wrong of you? Are you invading the customer's privacy? And how do you do that? Do you have an opt-in policy, for instance? Is that a good way of doing it? So I don't disagree. My only point is, my worry is, I personally believe that a bigger amount of this is, so without question, we have to check that box around, have checks and balances. But I kind of feel a lot more discussion has to go around, sort of get into more around even beneficial AI. How do we leverage it for, on the demand side, when the student, again, given the context that we're on, how do we help the student achieve what they're trying to achieve? Separately, the impact to society. How do we minimize any of the negative impacts in terms of job loss and automation? So anyway, that's kind of my point of view. Again, I'm not disagreeing with any of this.
Yeah, let me give you a couple of related examples, and maybe you can all think about how you feel about this. So today, schools in China are deploying emotion recognition software. They can tell which students are bored, which students are highly engaged, which students are angry. It could be quite useful pedagogically to see when a student is engaged. Even at a deeper level, with a tablet, you can track the eye movements today, and you can diagnose a learning disability potentially. You can see when someone is struggling with a particular reading. But I think you can all see how this could go tragically wrong. Some of you probably read about that controversy about Target mailing some pregnancy-related offers to a teenage girl. I think what creeps me out when I think about it is how much Google knows about all of us right now. Right now, Google probably does know quite often when people are pregnant before they know themselves. Think about that for a second. They know who is headed for divorce before that person knows. They know a lot of things about us. They also, by the way, they probably know exactly which stocks are about to plummet well before. Now, we don't think they're using that with their own pool of capital. I think they've been sort of very careful in a way to not reveal how much they really know about us. But they know everything about us, which is a little bit spooky. So let me give you an example specifically tailored to SNHU. This is not science fiction. There is some pretty credible research on the use of language by people who are likely to develop schizophrenia in their 20s. So you can look at a writing sample from a student, from an employee, from a trustee even, and say, we just happen to notice that this person has perhaps a 1 in 3 chance of developing schizophrenia at some point in the next few years. How do you handle knowledge like that?
So that's been an issue for a long time. So I have history of diabetes in my family. So years ago, you don't even now, so you don't have to do a lot of modeling for us to know that given the fact that my grandmother died from it, my dad has it, there is a probabilistically high chance that I'll have it and I have to deal with it. So to your point, I think as customers or as people, we have to change our mindset around this is machines and models doing what they're supposed to do. They're giving us the facts. What we do with it is our prerogative. So one option is, I don't believe in vaccines, I don't believe in climate change, I don't believe in models, and I choose to live in, I don't know, La La Land. The other option is, okay, it's a probabilistic thing, there's a chance that I won't have a problem, but let me proactively take that science and deal with it. But good you brought it up, because that's also one of the challenges I have faced here and elsewhere. Understanding of sort of model outputs. What does a model mean and not mean? A very good example, Bill Gates did not finish college, and he is a multi-billionaire. Do we infer from that college is a bad idea? Right? So this is, I mean, the archetypal sort of example that I like to use around the inference shouldn't be that, right? I mean, the inference is he's an outlier. Any model that we have is true on average.
Yeah.
It's a problem. So that's my short answer to your long answer to your short question.
Yes.
I'm just curious.
Name?
Hi, I'm Angie. I work in CETA. I'm curious if one of the bigger fears around AI, because we have DNA testing, we have all these ethical questions coming up, is what you referenced earlier, which is the load and the speed at which it can have an impact. So your Tay example, that was 24 hours versus in some other areas, you're just talking about getting to the data, not actually influencing it in 24 hours. And that, I think that's the one that I'm more curious about. What are the policies, ethical considerations, systematic changes that we would have to make to account for those potential?
And I guess you're going to have the last word because we have a set of 3 entrepreneurs pushing the state of the art about to come up. But I agree. The striking thing about the story of Ty was the velocity of it all, right? That's one way in which institutions are going to have to change in order to avoid destroying themselves with the misuse of AI, is to operate at an entirely different velocity. How do we do the transition to? Okay. Why don't you introduce them?
And again, thank you for our panel. Thank you all so much.
There you go.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michelle Dervin. I'm a principal on the investment team at Rethink. I work with Mass. Excited to introduce you to the 3 companies that we're going to hear from. The first is Angie Dasa. She's the COO at Bellus. Bellus is a really interesting company that's focused on reinventing how we measure human potential. Quite an audacious goal, I think everybody would agree. Essentially what they're looking to do, what they're working on, is measuring not just the content that people may have mastered throughout their lives, but the way that they think. So some of the kind of higher order thinking skills that that employers are seeking, in the workplace of today. And they've started out with a number of assessments that are focused specifically on problem solving. And their platform is driven by AI. So with that, I'll hand it over to Angie if she's okay. Okay. Well, I guess we have a couple of minutes to burn.
Would you like us to answer some of the privacy questions?
Yeah, why don't you do that, and then it'll give us a chance to get Bellus set up, and we can move over to those.
So I thought that was a really good concern with the privacy. That's why I think whenever you're looking at AI or any sort of applications, everybody wants to get that new mobile app or that new product that's going to give them so much more ability and productivity. But it's just paying attention to what data it's collecting. And a lot of this, because of the regulations, have to be spelled out in the terms of use and the privacy policies. And if you actually read through them and you look at the access controls systems have, you can control your own data. You can figure out where it's going, what it's doing, what they might be selling. And it's important to be able to take ownership of that and understand that. But also, from a security perspective, we're also doing that behind the scenes for any products that come into the university, any products that people are considering, even if it's open source, even if it's free products. We're taking a look at those terms of use and we're going, ooh, we may not want to use that as a university. Seems like a great product, but look what it's doing with the data. So you can do it on an individual level as well.
Great.
So if we're still waiting, I have a cheap example between the difference between security and privacy. Who thinks they know the difference between security and privacy?
Can I just give you this?
Security and privacy. That simple? Maybe it was K-12 educators were behind, but the image I had them imagine, and this is stark, right? Jailhouse toilet. Not very private. That's the difference between security and privacy. I have another one if you want me to kill more time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the schizophrenia one because you feel as if perhaps you have some responsibility to act, especially if, let's say, there was some other diagnostic that could predict a possibility of self-harm or danger to others. But at the same time, one of the precipitators of schizophrenia is stress. So That's probably a call that one shouldn't make for the person.
I do think that there is the possibility that I'm thinking of back to the example of the African American men from South Atlanta, that other people may screen these candidates out, but they actually may be a much better fit, the perfect candidate for an institution that's better able to support it. Mm-hmm. We're able to serve students with mental health issues much better than traditional on campus. So we are actually seeing a rise in students with schizophrenia and some sort of psycho diseases because they have the ability to do the timing and the choice of when to participate as opposed to the requirement of when to participate. So I do think the flip side of that is that you could find markets that had formerly been not available to you and not be able to identify, and then you're able to know what the right interventions are and how to support them. Yeah.
And you're also pointing towards another aspect of this institution, which is that it's an institution that is committed to collecting data, which makes it quite different. Most colleges are completely incapable of collecting data on what happens between their teachers and their students and between their students.
Matt, can I just also add one comment too? Because I think it's also, that case also makes me think, and apologies if this is a little nebulous, but a lot of times people that are deploying a lot of these technologies in education don't actually know how education works. Or the reverse end of that is they actually know too much about how education works, and so they're sort of optimizing a lot of these solutions for a market that itself is changing and being very disrupted. But, an example, and I don't know enough about that case with South Atlanta, but there have been plenty of other cases where people have made inferences about someone's ability to succeed in school. The paradigm they have for school is like Stanford or something, or like where they went to school. And it sounds crazy, but the design of a lot of you really start to get beneath the layer and you find very strange biases and assumptions about a lot of these markets that are not actually true. And so I think that's part of the challenge, right, is who really gets to define, and particularly when you think about education. Schools, by and large, don't always know what they do, right? They do lots of things. And so to say, well, you would succeed here, well, under what conditions, or how would you actually make that determination? So I would just add that as another complexity, I think, to the picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Being on the cutting edge pedagogically and in terms of student services means we're going to be collecting an entirely different kind of data here than someone else would collect. And also, there are relatively few institutions that, even if they were getting the pedagogy right, would be collecting data at scale. So we have almost a unique responsibility to be on the cutting edge with these tools and to tell other people about how to use them in the right way.
I just want to add a comment here with regards to our collection of data. We try to collect a ton of data. We're collecting it inconsistently and don't always know that we're doing it inconsistently. So there's some unanticipated biases and inaccuracies in the data. So one of the risks that we have to really start managing is understanding what data it is we're collecting and what data it is missing. And what is the implications of that? Because there are both positive and negative implications, which I think everybody's been kind of reinforcing. But we are not collecting as much data consistently that we think we are.
I'd love to hear an example.
Well, if we just take the email example for O365, if we were to look at the data from O365, understanding that there's a whole lot of email going on within our CRM system that is not necessarily fully captured over there in O365. If we take a look at what's captured in our management system, not 100% of it is captured in O365. So if we were to look at the O365 data, thinking it was a complete picture of anybody's behavior, we'd be wrong. We'd just be wrong.
Great. Thank you.
Can Angie hear us through the microphone?
Hi, how's it going? Is that Michelle's voice?
It is. Can you see me? No.
I cannot see you, but I can put that disembodied voice to your face in my head, so we're all good.
Okay, great. Well, you've got a nice audience here at SNHU. We gave a brief intro and in particular just talked about your tagline. looking to reinvent how we measure human potential. So I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for having me. Sorry about the technical difficulties. It seems that's always the hardest part of any meeting or presentation. I am going to do something daring and try and start with a video. Just very quickly, my name is Angie Desai. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Bellus. I think probably the most succinct way to introduce you to our mission is to let you hear it directly from our founder and from some of our early supporters and partners. So I'll pull that up. It's very brief, I promise. And I think, that'll be a good way to get you acquainted. Let's go right here. Can everyone see the screen okay?
Everyone agrees our education system is broken. Students are graduating without the skills that the workforce demands, and yet we continue to teach the same content in our schools. To understand why, you have to understand the history of our education system. In the 1800s, only very wealthy students prepared for college. But throughout the 1900s, college became the end goal for everyone. And to cope with the growing numbers of applicants, a small group of elite colleges called for the creation of a standardized admissions test, the SAT. Over time, more applicants and more colleges led to more testing. What we test determines what we teach. So if you change this one line of code in the operating system, you change the way the entire system runs.
Think of any game that you might play. How you keep score determines almost everything about how the game is played. A game of basketball. If you raised or lowered the basket, you're not just going to change the way the game is played. You're going to change the way the talent is evaluated. Now, here's the most remarkable and astonishing thing about the SAT and ACT high stakes testing. They have virtually zero predictability. And yet they cover a whole series of high stakes decisions about what is taught and who wins access to top colleges and resources.
Bellus is creating a new medium for assessment that evaluates how people think, not just what they know. Partnering with employers who are defining the future of 21st century work, we're studying and evaluating skills like problem solving, critical thinking, imagination, creativity, and systems thinking.
These are the things that are the hardest to measure and which will require a new way of thinking about an individual's potential and their skills. The labor force is set to experience the most dramatic changes that we've seen in over 100 years. You've got automation and AI, where we're going to see trillions of dollars displaced, and companies are going to have to be able to very rapidly identify what skills they need from the talent that's available, and better assessment is going to be the key to that.
Through our virtual world, we assess the cognitive skills that matter for this century.
The beauty of the technology is that we can track to an atomic level all elements of this decision making, and we can start to map it against known factors in the underlying assessment model. That type of scientific approach is a massive differentiator because it means that we can have the confidence that what we're measuring is truly relevant to the job. If we don't make a step change here, we are going to end up in a situation where people are fundamentally unprepared for the world that's developing around them.
We have got to have more students who are better able to enter highly ambiguous environments and make decisions that are going to have critical impacts for the future.
In the face of automation, we need employers to understand the skills that define human intelligence. We need governments to take mass-scale workforce displacement seriously and to invest in the assessment and retraining programs needed for those likely to be effective. Our education system is supposed to be the great equalizer, offering opportunity regardless of starting socioeconomic status or zip code at birth. Now we have an opportunity to reinvent our education system to prepare all people for school, for work, and for life.
All right, great. Let me just see with thumbs up or thumbs down. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, great. Oh, wow. That's a very positive response. So, hopefully that gave you some of the underpinnings of our mission at Bellus. Michelle asked me to speak a little bit about our product, what we're building, the team that's doing it, and in particular, how we use artificial intelligence in what we're building in our product. So I'll go through some of that, hopefully briefly, and then turn it over for Q&A. Do we still have time for that? I know we were a little late getting started.
Yeah, Angie, if you could keep the presentation just to 5 minutes, I think that would be great. We're running a little behind, but I think everybody's interested to hear more. So, and there's probably a couple of questions.
Great. So, as you heard in that video, Bellus is seeking to reinvent how human potential is measured. And we use simulation as our medium. Think honestly of being dropped into a video game where the scenarios you encounter ask you to exercise skills like situational awareness, systems thinking, decision making, and agility. And because you're in a digital environment, we have the opportunity to observe your process, your footsteps through the world, and not just the product or the answer that you have arrived at. Why are we focused on measurements? Not because the test is the be all and end all, but as you heard in part in that video, because we think it's a critical lever for reshaping what's measured, therefore what's valued and what's taught in K through 12. But also because assessments are rising in use and in prominence in employment, in enterprises. Something like 90% at this point of the Fortune 500 are using some form of assessment as part of their hiring. And so what's critical for us is to take advantage of that, to find partners from that Fortune 500 space that help us understand what are the skills that are critical to working in those environments, to a 21st century context in which we want human intelligence to function in partnership, not in competition with artificial intelligence and automation. So our first, marquee relationship has been with McKinsey, where we've studied for the last 2 years and now deployed an assessment around problem solving. And so at the front of McKinsey's funnel, we're now gathering data points as they deploy our assessment to tens of thousands of potential candidates. Our goal is to replicate this type of partnership to study skills like inquiry, imagination, creativity, collaboration with partners where that's really the core of what they're due, and it's evolving at pace with the way that computation and automation is changing the deployment of those abilities. As you can imagine, that requires a fairly interdisciplinary team behind the curtain. And so we're bringing together learning scientists, data scientists, psychometricians, game developers, artists, platform engineers, and of course, artificial intelligence and machine learning engineers. I'm going to talk a little bit about what those teams actually do, how the assessment works, and sort of how it's built. So if you think about the role of our learning scientists, it's basically to embed at our client, to develop an extremely granular understanding of the nature of work that's being done. Think about trying to understand the bones that make up the skeleton of work. So for us, bones are verb, object, adjectival phrases that describe in a really minute way what is the action being taken in this step of the work. So think of identify relevant sources or develop temporal understanding. These are useful for us because we can connect these back to the cognitive constructs required to do that piece of work. It's important to us to have a real grounding in cognitive theory as opposed to just be one of these off-the-shelf assessments where a CEO or a CHRO says, hey, I'm going to give this to 20 of my top performers. If it by and large reflects our armchair psychology view of what these people are like, we want to deploy it in recruiting to try and get people who have the same DNA. For us, it's less about what your existing population is like, because that's riddled with all the biases of the hiring process, and more what is actually the nature of work, how is that changing over time, and what does cognitive theory tell us is required to do that work. Once we have these bones, our learning scientists work with our game designers to say, what new skin can we put over this skeleton? So we build our task scenarios in the natural world for a whole bunch of reasons we could talk about later, not least of which is reducing bias, creating an engaging environment where people can be inspired, get into a flow state, and because it gives us the variance required in order to test a whole bunch of different things, right? A natural disaster might test something like situational awareness and agility, whereas building an ecosystem might test something like critical thinking, systems thinking, decision making. And so we develop these scenarios, which are then passed on to our data scientists. This is sort of an interesting secret sauce element of our product, but basically it means looking at those footprints I described, what we call user telemetry data through the world, to say, if we were to build out expert models of what play would look like if somebody were leveraging those skills that we just described earlier, what would those steps look like in terms of mouse click, hover, opening something, researching it, time on task, sequence of actions. And so we're not just looking at sort of randomly what actions are in a black box model predictive of a certain set of behaviors. We're saying, okay, if we ground this in theory, what's actually relevant and what's actually explainable? I'll skip through these, but basically we're looking for scores, telemetry scores that give us meaningful differentiation on the things that we care about. I'm jumping ahead because I was told what's of interest to this group is sort of where is AI deployed in our product. And so there's a few different places worth mentioning. The first is one of the biggest challenges of what we're trying to do is deploy a digital assessment remotely. How is that different from assessments that are used today in an educational context? Well, they're not proctored, right, in a secure setting. And so what that means is if Michelle is taking our assessment and she's at, in the comfort of her own home and decides to tape it on her phone and put it up on YouTube and give, friends or any YouTube user an instruction on how she navigated through it, that can't compromise our assessment. That can't meaningfully advantage any other test taker. And so what we've done is actually designed a generative approach to developing our assessments such that each user has a meaningfully different permutation of the assessment. So think about that. I might be experiencing a natural disaster that tests my situational awareness and my agility in the context of a volcano, whereas Michelle might be experiencing it in the context of a hurricane or a typhoon. And so even if she were to give me some heuristics for play, I wouldn't be able to apply those one-to-one to my setting. I would actually have to go through the mental exercises that we're trying to assess in order to make it successfully through the task scenario. For anyone in the room who is familiar with psychometrics, the number one question that comes up is, okay, well, if we're asking people different questions, if they're experiencing different scenarios, how do we know that they're equivalent? And so that's a real big challenge for us where we leverage AI as well, which is to say, how do we generate game boards or scenarios that are meaningfully different permutations in the experience, but are equivalent in terms of what they're assessing, the complexity and the level of difficulty. So that's done a couple of different ways, feeding parameters into our algorithms to help us generate equivalent scenarios, and also using bots that play through our scenarios that give us the confirmation and the conviction that we actually have equivalent levels of difficulty, complexity on the parameters that we care about and measure. I'll go through this very quickly. This is usually most interesting to folks who come from the world of entertainment or gaming, but you can imagine to have those many different permutations, you've got to generate a lot of content. And it turns out that's quite an expensive endeavor. For every single 3D model that you see on screen, you've had a rigger, you've had a texturer, you've had a lighting expert, you've had an artist who's put something into that piece. And that's not really our core competency and not what we want to be spending our investor money on. And so what we've done is actually something fairly novel. It's an approach to developing 3D content from 2D images that are available free or cheaply, easily on the web. So we actually have a fully automated pipeline of going from 2D to 3D to create our scenarios. If this is of interest to anyone, we have a little section of our website under our work that talks about it more. And this goes a little bit back to what I was talking about in terms of how we approach scoring. There's a married approach here of saying, okay, can we score telemetry data consistent with what we believe expert play looks like, but then connect those scores that are related to observable behaviors back up to latent cognitive constructs that are harder to see in action. So think about something like decision making. It's hard to evaluate decision making based on somebody's actions. It's hard to give a qualitative score to that, but you can observe component parts of decision making like prioritization. And so some of the ML algorithms that we have developed and apply to scoring help us go from these scores that we can observe on data, on user actions we can observe, to those latent traits that we want to assign values and evaluation to. That's sort of married with a psychometric approach to explainability. So things like factor analysis, multidimensional item response theory. And so that's something that we're trying to pioneer in this field, given that these vast amount of data enable an ML approach, but deploying in an employment and an educational context means it's got to be explainable. So I zoomed through a lot of that. I'll just circle back to our end goal, which is really to develop the data sets required to validate this approach to eventually offer a meaningful, credible alternative to standardized tests in today's education system. All right, that was maybe the fastest I've gone through that.
That was great, Angie. It was a lot. I've heard, I know in Bellus a lot more, I think, than the audience, but it was still a lot to absorb. I'm guessing there may be some questions from the audience. We probably just have time for one question, I think, as we're running a little bit behind. Any questions? Yep.
Yeah, it's totally fascinating. Love the applicability to reskilling the workforce. I wondered if you had also thought about how this might help guide young people to help inform their career choice in terms of sort of where their natural skills align with the demands of certain career choices.
Absolutely. I think that's a really relevant application for young people, for folks who are thinking about how to start or to reorient their career. I think, one of the places where we see an opportunity for deploying our assessment is not only in an employment first job context or in an educational sort of gateway between high school and college context, but when you have employers or whole states, Singapore has undertaken things like this, and approaches like this are being developed in the Middle East also, to think about evaluating whole workforce populations. You want to retrain somebody to be a data scientist, but they've never done data science. How do you identify the cognitive capability, the proclivities that are going to enable them to be successful and make it worth investing in that training? So absolutely, I think that's, if we get there, an approach that would be of real value.
That's awesome. Angie, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Let me know if I can follow up or be of use in any other way.
Great, thanks so much. The next company we're going to hear from is called Sense Education. We're going to hear from Seth Haberman and Akiba Kovitz. I see Akiba is on the line. Can you hear us okay, Akiba?
I can. Let me get Seth on as well. Hold on one second, our CEO.
Thank you for bearing with us with the time delay. We've been running slightly behind. We had a couple of technical issues. Just while we're getting set up, very briefly, you're going to hear from Sense. The problem that they're working on and how they're leveraging AI is basically to enable professors to provide personalized feedback to students on open-ended assignments and questions, which is obviously a very challenging problem. So if you guys are ready to go.
Hello.
Hey, Seth.
We wanted to make you feel like we were really in touch with you. So.
That's awesome. Seth, I just gave you guys a very quick intro. Thank you for bearing with us as we're running a little late. And we'll hand it straight over to you guys.
Okay. Is it the same amount of time or is the time compressed?
No, 10 minutes would be great. And we may have one or two questions at the end.
Okay. So we're Thanks, everyone, and thanks for attending. Everyone looks very comfortable in that room. We're going to show one slide, and then we're going to show you a demo. And if you have questions, please interrupt me and let me know, and we'll stop and answer questions along the way. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see my screen.
You're
all right,
good.
terrific. So just quick sense at a glance, the company was founded in 2016 to use unsupervised machine learning and genomics algorithms to find common patterns in student submissions. Our applicability is for STEM moving to FEAST. That's a term Akiba has coined, which is finance, engineering, accounting, science, and technology. But our first product, the one we'll show you today, is for computer science and adjacent fields. The tech is a hybrid, meaning if you look at what the best chess playing system in the world, it's a hybrid between which uses both computer intelligence and human intelligence. The best stock picking systems are the same way, and that's what our system uses. So it's both a human and a computer intelligence system. And our goal is to improve education outcomes by providing detailed feedback to students on how they solve problems, unattended responses so that it can answer questions all the time, and generate ideas on the dynamics of how students learn and how they work together. So with that really quick introduction, and knowing that we're mindful on time, I'm going to jump right in. And so what I'm going to show you is a problem from a major engineering school in New York. And this is a introduction to computer science class where these are actual problems from. There are about 250 of these problems. Each one of those white blocks represents a submission from a student. And in this case, this is a, and let me know if you can read this, if that's large enough. This is a program, it's probably something in the first 2 months of a computer science class that calculates BMI. And it's if you can see it, the program says, you know, how tall are you? How much do you weigh? It calculates BMI. BMI is weight divided by height squared. And then in this case, it uses CDC guidelines to calculate whether you're underweight or normal or overweight. And I have 250 of these or so, and they, you know, look different. They have different syntax, different morphology sometimes. And so if you put on your instructor or TA hat, it's a lot of work to go through all of these. And it's a lot of work to sort of do them at the same level of energy and to be able to provide feedback. And so with Sense, what we can do is rather than saying, let's treat all of these individually, we can look for patterns. And so remember I said it's sort of a combined human and computer feedback. I can do it in two ways. I could run my AI and have the whole thing just sort of automatically run, or I can do the sort of experimentation that as a TA, you know, if I put on my TA hat, I was sort of doing. The first thing I'm going to check is, I'm curious, did everyone use this BMI, right? Because you'd think if this is a BMI assignment, everyone should have a formula that looks like this. So I'm going to tell the AI, here's a formula, here's an example. Go see if you can find it in other assignments. And if we look at this, we see that, sure enough, it appears in most of the assignments. But interestingly, not all of them, and sometimes twice. And so let's take a quick look at what that is. So most of them, it appears, and you can see we're not looking lexically how it works. We're sort of looking at the general structure, and it appears in a lot of them. And I'm just going to tell the system to regroup them, which is move all of the ones that it appears once into one group. If you notice there are different thicknesses of the bands, that thickness represents how much of the code that formula is. So here the band is a little bit thicker, which would make me think, let's see what's going on. And here, they have two different pieces for that formula. But everything else looks kind of normal. There's another group called group 2 where the formula appears twice, and that's kind of interesting why that would appear twice in a solution. We can take a look. And if we look, we can see that once they do the calculation for pounds, and once they do it for pounds and inches, and once they do it for kilograms. So this is a student who didn't quite understand yet the reusability of the code, but tried to do something a little bit more. And so the system has detected that formula appears twice. And it turns out there's a group of students who do that. Then there's a group of students who it doesn't appear at all, and we can take a look maybe at one of those and see at this piece of code. Here's a student who said, input your BMI, meaning they didn't actually understand the problem. They just said, input your BMI, and then they correctly stratified it, but they didn't actually calculate it, and so that's why it didn't appear there. So having a good sense of all of that, I'm going to save this assignment, and I'll just call it today. And what I'm going to do now is, once that's saved, I'm going to tell the system to turn the AI on and to start to process it to look for other patterns. And I'm going to select keep existing patterns because I want it to keep that one pattern that I've instructed it on. And so now the system is going to go ahead and start to work and start to find other patterns in that assignment. Now, because this is sort of computationally very comprehensive, it takes a while. And so what I'm going to do, like a good cooking show, is I happen to have one here, which is the results of running this process. And the only change is that I've named the solution. So when it comes out, it'll come out just saying cluster 1, cluster 2, cluster 3, so on, and I've named it. And so let's take a look at what we have. The system has identified 8 clusters of how students solve the problems. And those clusters are made up of different patterns. Remember, each of those bands are a pattern. So let's take a look at this first pattern, of which there are about 150. So 150 of my 250 students have a pretty homogeneous solution. Let's take a look at it. Pattern 1 is the one we defined. Pattern 2 is the stratification that we saw. And pattern 3 is input weights in kilograms and meters. And so what this says is that everyone in this group has these 3 patterns. And what that means is I can provide feedback to this group with one stroke. In other words, I don't have to actually go through each one of these by hand. I don't have to write individual feedback because one set of comments applies to the whole group. Let's take a look at a couple of the other ones. The second one, called extra conversion, this is about 30 students, in which case that would give me about 180 of my 250 students that will be done. And here you see I have the same pattern 1 and the same pattern 2 appear, but now there's a new pattern 4 instead of pattern 3. And what pattern 4 is has a new element to it, which is a calculation to convert the English units to metric units, because the formula is designed for metric units. And so if we look at each one of these, you see that same common element where the conversion is done. And so it's interesting that, I guess the assignment wasn't necessarily clear, but that a good 30 students of my 250 students, 10% of the class or so, more than 10% of the class, actually did the assignment this way. The next one is interesting. The next one is a kind of favorite of mine. And I'm going to actually put the system into comparison mode just to sort of see what's the difference between cluster 3 and cluster 1. So cluster 1, if you remember, had pattern 3, pattern 1, and pattern 2. Here's pattern 3 and pattern 1 the same way. But there's a new pattern 5. And it's a very subtle difference. If you look here, the code says if Z is less than 18.5, print underweight. And here it says if BMI is less than 18.5, assign a status variable and only print at the end that it's underweight. And so the system has detected that a group of students, another 20 students or so, which puts me at 200, have solved this problem in another way. Let's take a look at one more group, and then I'm going to show you something that we can do. If you remember, there was a group of students, I found one, but it turns out about 4% of the class didn't understand the problem. And so they know how to program. It looks like they know what they're doing, but they didn't calculate BMI. They only input BMI and then stratified it. So what that means is these are students who missed what the assignment was, but have good capability. And so the next time I taught this course, I can fix that, knowing something about the data that's available in this course. And so that's the type of information that Sense feeds back. And then there are a few more sort of specific examples and things like that. So let me show you what we can do to help these kids. I'm going to take this assignment, I'm going to copy it, and assume that these kids are running some sort of, output correctness and things like that. We have something that can recognize the patterns and say, if this student is struggling and is not getting the right answer and things like that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload this. I'm going to have this capability to upload it to Sense, and what the system is going to do is it's going to recognize that it's seen this pattern, and it says, gives me a hint, the assignment requires calculating BMI. And so what it realizes is that I've seen this, I've trained the system to do this pattern, and I can give this student a hint to say what they've done wrong and what they need help on. And so that gives you a really quick sense of what Sense can do, is we can discover patterns in how kids work. We can see a really just sort of interesting thing is none of the kids who did extra conversion also did the status variable. And that makes me think that there's some sort of social dynamic going on in the classroom, that the kids who came up with one solution tended to work together and not the kids who worked in another solution. So Sense gives you that ability to cluster. Sense gives you that ability to provide dynamic feedback. And so are there any questions?
Yep, we have one question.
Hi, my name's Angie. Very cool product. What's your optimal class size to have effective groupings and feedback?
So some of it's going to depend on the complexity of the assignments and things like that. Usually what we find is once we have about 40 students, we can get a pretty good statistical read. Sometimes when people have less than 40 students, they can use earlier submissions to train the system. But as a machine learning company, the more assignments you have, the better and the more confidence that you have. But we sort of start, looks like 40 can work. Now, you can actually work with less if you remember how that manual mode worked. So then you can actually work with 10 or 12 students if you wanted to, but I'm not sure you'd get a lot of, you necessarily get a lot of feedback. So we like large classes that grow larger, or if you have historical assignments, then you can train it.
Oh, very cool. Thank you.
Oh, hi, I'm another Angela. You must think it's all Angelas. I just had a question for you. Maybe I've misunderstood, but it appears that the lecturer, the faculty member who gave out this, did not have an answer scheme, because every time I would set an assignment, I have a model answer or a number of variations. And surely the model answer would be the cues for Sense to search for those patterns, whilst you use the data set of your assignments to establish what should this answer include.
So that's a really good question, and there's a little bit of a dynamic there, because remember, you're the person who can edit the feedback on these submissions. Yeah. But the reality is that sometimes the answer schemes that we've created in the past are proxies for what we're looking for. But here, you sort of switch to a mode is, this is what the students actually did, right? Because so you may write a proxy for an answer scheme that nobody actually solved, but they went ahead and solved it in a completely different way, and you have to respond to that. And so what we found working with teachers is they start to discover things that students using functions that they never even taught, students solving things in ways that they didn't even respond. So you can still say, hey, let me look at this. Does it have an element of input? Does it have a conversion formula that uses a square function? Does it have 4 conditions and things like that? So you can create that. But the system is also telling you what those students are actually doing, which in a way is somewhat more accurate than just having, I'm looking for a for loop or things like that. I'll give you an example. Here's another student who, it's in our group X, the ones we don't have enough statistical significance on, got pattern 3 right, got pattern 1 right, left out one of the if clauses. So they made a mistake. And we can actually give feedback to this one individual student, also with the notion that somebody else may repeat that mistake. Now, I don't know if you're going to pre-build all of your proxies for what the students will do, whether you'd ever get to this one. But the system's going to tell you, this is what your students are doing. And so we find that this kind of, you could set it up. We can look for, I can show you examples. I don't want to take too much time, but I can show you examples where we drive the system for exactly the sort of things. You know, there are 2 for loops, or is there a while loop? You know, we can look for those sort of things. But here, this is actually showing you how the students have solved the problems. And so sometimes what we find is the professors learn to adapt the grading schemes based on what they actually see back from the students. And remember, in 8, you know, I did 8, I can solve 8 of these, gets me about 95% of my class. Okay. And so that's going to save a lot of time, both for you or for your TAs.
It would strike me that a good use of it would be for formative assessment, that the students would use the tool themselves to assess where they're going wrong their own answers before they submit it for summative.
Absolutely. There was, we're working with University of Kent in the UK, and they want to be able to create patterns for partial assignments so that the kids who are stuck can upload what they have, and the system can give them feedback and hints about where they are. I think it's an absolutely fabulous idea.
Great. I think we have one more quick question, right?
I really love this example because it shows how it can be evaluated based on people from different progress levels. Do you see that, is it able to be used with different programming languages, or even for like different assignments where it could be used with different languages like Spanish, French, you know?
So great question. Globally. So from programming languages today, we support C, C++, Python, and Java. And then next up are things like MATLAB and R. From content, here's the big picture of what we do, what we think about for content. In the process of looking for patterns, what we're saying is we believe that the number of solutions that students will give you will converge. So if I ask a student a question like, what did you do over the summer vacation? Or how does a rose petal make you feel? You may get 10,000 answers if you have 10,000 students. But if I say, what were the 3 root causes of the US Civil War? Or describe cell mitosis, I'm not going to get those things. And so with the tools that are available to us today, we're working on things like Excel spreadsheets. We're working on free text for law and biology and IT. And so we're starting to build out the solutions beyond computer science. And we're looking for feedback from groups exactly like yours, which is what should we really focus on next, and use your expertise to help make that system function properly.
Great. Does anybody want to shout out some feedback really quickly? Just like a lightning round.
Come on, does it suck or is it great?
Are you live?
Yeah, we're live.
That's cool, okay.
We're live in about 4 universities, and we've been talking to some of your compatriots. Akiva, who are we talking to? About doing 2 classes at Southern New Hampshire University.
We're talking to lots of schools in complementary space and very different spaces. I think we're getting lots of good feedback. And we hope to get more in the next 30 seconds from you guys about where we should go or how it looks or anything along those lines.
Okay, we're really going to keep them like super short, just a sentence if you've got some advice for them.
I think it would be great to give the professor guidance on where the assignment instruction is not clear, or and I think potentially in discussion forum to provide answers like you describe as unattended if a student have questions.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's right. There's a lot of things we can do. In general, we're not a pedagogy system. We're a platform, and we look for universities to provide the sort of pedagogical feedback that they want. You know, it would be really cool if we built something that you could throw that to me, right? And I can like it with sort of.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks, Akiba. And we'll see if we can gather some more feedback for you guys through the Sandbox after the event as well.
Okay. Terrific. Thank
Bye,
you.
Guys.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
One final company presenting this afternoon, all the way from Sweden. They're a very early stage company. They actually founded this company as students themselves. They're engineering students. And the problem they're working on is how do you get professors, instructors better continuous feedback on what students find engaging and on the courses in general, and they're leveraging AI to do that. So we have Eric, who's the CEO of Hubbard.ai. Eric, can you hear us okay? How are we doing on sound, Stephen? Does it seem to be working? I think it's working. Oh, he's muted, is he?
So it looks like you can hear us, but we can't hear you.
Eric, it looks like your sound's muted. Down in the bottom left.
No.
There we
now.
go. Oh, perfect.
Yes.
Awesome.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you.
Hi, Eric. You have a great crowd here from SNHU. I think you can see them on the video screen. I've given you just a brief introduction, explained a little bit about what Hubbard is working on, and so we'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you. So I don't have to go too much through the background of creating Hubbard then, but in short, me and the co-founder Victor, we kind of stumbled upon a lot of course evaluations upon the last year of university and found out that there got to be a better way to do this than the regular old surveys that we're filling out right now. And we created Hubbard.ai. So I thought I'd show you through how it works. So that one, I think. All right.
We're still with you. We can see your screen.
Thank you. So Hubbard.ai, he's an artificially intelligent course evaluation bot, which we have created. And we made him to make it easier for you to collect feedback on your education, on your courses and on your seminars and workshops. Everything. And let me show you how he does that. So first of all, right now Hubbard is in the beta state, so everything is kind of simple. And what you do is you create an account right now and you find yourself on this page and click create an evaluation. And this, I have a kind of bad connection, I'm sorry about that. And here it takes you to this page where you can choose your role, if you're a teacher or if you're a teaching assistant, if you want to call yourself a trainer or a facilitator, and then what you are asking Hubbard to evaluate for you. Let's take a discussion. And then you will ask, you will tell him what questions should you ask Hubbard. And in this beta phase, you only have 3 different sets of questions. Let's select this first one. It is the start, stop, continue model. So Hubbard will be asking the students about something the teacher could start doing that would improve this discussions, or let's select course. That sounds better. Something the teacher could start doing that would improve the course, something the teacher should stop doing that would improve the course, and something that's working well that should continue. The reason to why we choose these 3 questions is that they generate very good feedback. It's something that you can act upon directly because you get start doing this, stop doing that, and so from the students. Select the duration of how long you want this evaluation to be open. And then you say, the course name is physics, 10 credits. And the email addresses are, and then you paste your students' emails here. And then you click create evaluation. And what happens now is Hubbard will send an email to all your students and ask them to have a chat with him about this course. And when they do, click the link in the email, they will end up at this chat. So this is Hubbard. This is where you meet him. And then he will say, hi, I'm Hubbard. I'm helping professor instructor, that's me, create an anonymous evaluation of this. Are you ready? Yes, I'm ready, Hubbard. Let's go. So what Hubbard will do now is he will ask those questions. So what could the teacher start doing that would improve the course? And should the student say nothing, which is a quite common response in the surveys, which don't get followed up, then Hubbard will ask them, come up, surely something must be improved. And I say, okay. If you just say, yeah, something would need to be improved. If you're messing with him, then he will ask, okay, what? And then you say, stuff. This stuff should be improved. And then he will go on to the next questions, and you will chat with him as if he was a normal interview facilitator, as if he was a person. And he will ask you questions when you're giving him vague answers. For example, everything is working well or nothing is working well, and so on. This chat takes normally around 2-3 minutes for the students to finish, depending on how many questions he's asking and how many nothings and yes and so they tell him. But let's pretend that we have finished this chat. Then we'll go into the results page. When Hubbard has chatted with all your students, he will send you an email and say, all right, I got some results for you. Click here to see them. So hubbard.ai/results. You will get a link to this results page in the email he sends you. And we have prepared the results for you, of course. So you won't get the results from what I just wrote, because that would just be nothing. So this is how our results page looks right now in the beta. And he will give you a summary and say, in this fictional course, most of the students are satisfied with the course. No main questions were answered with no comments, and most of the responses to the main questions contain informative feedback. So he kind of gives you a little, a short introduction to how this evaluation went. And then he shows you the overall experience, what the students thought of the course. This is a question he asks them. What's your overall experience of the course? And then you can click that and you will see 84% of them liked it. And here are the comments to that. 10% were neutral, and a few were negative about it, and you can read those comments there. Then he will show you how many conversations he had, of course, and he will sort the comments into topics. So he will look for different educational related topics and display them to you in the form of a list of strength and improvable areas. So he will say, in this case, the discussions, readings, and seminars were positive. That's your strength, and these are the information, the clarity, and the homework are the top discussed improvable areas. Answers to the questions, what should the teacher start doing or stop doing? So if you click this one, you will see all the comments related to that topic. So for example, I really enjoyed the discussions, they were very interesting. And then you will see in this kind of listed word cloud as well, that these are the top mentioned words within this topic of the discussions. And you can browse through these different topics and see what the students are saying in positive and in improvable terms. And for example, if you click this information, in this case, you don't even have to read through the comments, because if you look in this word cloud, you will see the information, homework, instructions, assignments, clearer, understand, unclear. Those are what the students are talking about, and you can get a sense of what they are talking about before you even read the comments. But then you can browse through them and see what they actually have said about him, about the information, and you can browse through that in the same manner as the strengths. You can download a transcript of this, and this will show you all the chats Hubbard has had. So this is a chat with respondent 1, respondent 2, and so on. And these are just the informative parts of the chat. So it won't show the all of the yes, what do you mean, stuff like that. It's only like the answers and the questions and answers. And if you click detailed results, you will see an estimation of how much time you save by using Hubbard instead of facilitating the feedback collection yourself. A satisfaction score about what the students thought about using Hubbard, because I always ask that question, how do you like this way of giving feedback instead of traditional surveys? And we sort that into positive, neutrals, and negatives. And we also divide the topics into activities, which are, for example, discussions and readings, seminars, and so on. Properties, which are like the enjoyability of something, the clarity and the detail of something, or how interesting something is. So kind of adjectives. And then some miscellaneous topics as well. You can browse through the other comments also. And this is the beta of Hubbard. But we are expanding him, and right now we're working on building, allowing him to ask more questions, because right now you saw those 3 question sets. And in the future, it will look something like this. I've actually never shown this before, I think, to anyone. So you will select the basic set of questions that you want Hubbard to ask, and then some topics that you want him to ask about. So, for example, ask the basic start, stop, continue questions, and then include the expectations and the information, and then you will see a preview of how the chat will look that Hubbard will have with some example responses and so on. And then you can say, yeah, I'm happy with this. Go ahead and ask my students about this. And then you have this is another thing that we're building. It's an hierarchical structure so that you will be able to set up, for example, the different programs here, and then an administrator for that program and the courses within that program. And then you can take, for example, this course, Basic Economics, 10 credits. In that you can see that there are 3 teachers, and the results will be aggregated from those 3 teachers to a course result. And then all of these courses would aggregate up to a program result or report showing you some easy to comprehend metrics, for example, the difficulty level, the pace, the workload, and student engagement. Communication and so on, just give you an easy overview as the responsible for the program to log in here and see that how is everything going. And if you just see green lights, everything is okay. But if you see difficulty, it's too easy, workload is too high, then you can click that and you can browse down and you can see where is this issue, or are there some conflicts among courses that raises the workload in a particular period, so that you should even it out over time. And then yeah, this is just a screenshot of the chat. I don't have to show you that because you already saw that. So that's Hubbard.ai. So great. We have, we're still, it's still very early days, as you've seen on this, the beta results and so on. But we are working on some real interesting stuff. And right now we're looking for some partner universities that will help us try out this new organizational hierarchical structure and help us develop a good set of questions for you to ask, and then give us information and feedback about what you as a university want to see in a product like this. And we want to have a very close collaboration with some pilot partners in the near future. So
great.
That's where we are right now.
Thanks, Eric. That's great. And I think we have a couple of questions. Priya, did you had a question?
Yeah. Thank you. That was great. So the first question I had was with regard to how did you validate the model? So you had to, how much data did you have to use to train it? And how did you assess the accuracy?
So we have compared it to some different tools. We have compared it to some teachers doing regular course evaluations and then using Hubbard. And we have, first of all, we trained him with like something around 40,000 conversations right now. But we validated it we were testing we were looking at the results from traditional course surveys where you have maybe 30% response rate. And then the questions of that, and then how well that correlated to what the students actually thought about the course and what they wanted to be improved and what they wanted to continue, and compare that to results of Hubbard. And we found that a lot of the opinions from the students are not getting through within these traditional surveys. No matter how well formed these surveys are, traditional surveys, the questions are perfectly asked, the scales are perfect from a methodological view, sorry, my English. But the results aren't really getting there because the students don't feel it's a natural way of communicating with the teacher through those feedback surveys. So even if those are more scientifically developed than Hubbard is, then the results are still better with Hubbard because the students are more speaking in a natural medium for them, and it's more natural for them to communicate in that way. So we find the results being more accurate with chat through Hubbard than these traditional surveys. I hope that answers your question.
Kind of.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a question for you. I was going to ask you about the extent extent to which you cross-tabulated across courses, strokes, modules, or programs, but at the end you showed me how you aggregated them to the program. But I saw that you put the student email address in. Do you add any other demographic data, for example, age, gender, course, discipline? Because that's a gap in the student engagement literature, the extent to which students in different disciplines, years of study, age, gender, international versus national, that's where the differences lie. And that might be something useful to add into Hubbard once it's scaled, I presume.
Yeah, definitely. We want to add the possibility for the teacher to see this comment come from a student that attends a lot of courses and puts down 40 hours a week on this course. And this comment comes from a student that has only been to one lecture in this semester, so that you can kind of weigh them and see how important, if you want to say like that, the comments are, or how relevant they are. So we definitely want to build that into Hubbard in the future.
Great. Have we got any final questions or advice for the company? No. Okay, great. Eric, thank you so much, and apologies for keeping you waiting. We ran a little behind.
Thank you.
But this was really interesting, and have a lovely weekend.
Yeah, thank you. Great. You too. Take care.
Well, I'm stepping into Brian's shoes to thank everyone for coming out today and participating in this wonderful discussion on AI in education. Matt, we're very grateful that you were able to come out and help moderate the discussion. Very thankful to our panelists, Priya, Elizabeth, and Rob. Rob left. All right, so it was really nice. Lisa, thanks again for helping out with organizing. Michelle, this was wonderful. Thanks to you for pulling together this event. Very appreciated. And Steve, you're great at solving every technological problems that we encounter with events like this. This is wonderful. So thanks again. Thank you.
I'll just add one more thing. So out here, we're going to be setting up for another event that's starting actually kind of very soon. So normally we love when people kind of hang out and